Go home, old man. Nobody here wants your junk. That's what they told him at the gates of the very country he once risked his life to defend. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just clutched the folded flag a little tighter and turned away unheard and unseen. The guards laughed. A few visitors whispered, "Maybe he's confused." But what they didn't know was this man had saved 17 soldiers in a jungle most of them had never heard of. And 3 hours later, those same gates were silenced. A black SUV with 4 stars pulled up to his home. The soldiers who mocked him now stood trembling at attention. What followed would rewrite everything. The sun hadn't yet breached the hills when Samuel "Sam" Granger stirred in his creaking bed. At 79, he no longer needed an alarm. His body, like an old pocket watch, still ticked with military precision, up by 5:30 a.m., rain or shine. He'd been following the same routine for more than 5 decades. It wasn't duty that woke him anymore. It was habit, and maybe something deeper, something unspoken. Sam swung his legs over the side of the bed, wincing as his knees resisted. The floorboards groaned beneath him, just like they always had since he bought the place in 1978. A modest 2-bedroom house on the edge of Braddock Ridge in rural Pennsylvania. Quiet, unchanged. Except for the empty space beside him. The air still carried a faint trace of her perfume, though she'd been gone 6 years now. Betty. His North Star in a world that never quite made sense after Vietnam. Her photo sat on the nightstand, smiling in a summer dress, hands folded neatly in her lap. Every morning Sam greeted her with a nod. "Mornin', Bets," he mumbled, touching the worn frame with his callous thumb. Down in the kitchen, a single mug sat on the counter next to the percolator, just as he left it the night before. His fingers moved on autopilot coffee grounds, water wait for the gurgle. He stared out the window over the sink while it brewed, watching the fog lift from the fields behind the house. Across the gravel driveway sat his 1971 Ford pickup, rust on the fenders, but engine solid as a prayer. He still tinkered with it once a week just to keep his hands busy. After breakfast, Sam opened the hall closet and reached for the coat. It was the one Betty gave him the winter of '97. The left pocket still had the stitch she'd patched by hand. Inside that pocket always was the bronze star he never displayed. The ribbon had faded, but the weight remained unchanged. He stood there longer than usual that morning, eyes tracing the quiet lines of the house. A pressure stirred in his chest, not pain, not fear. A pull, a whisper from somewhere long buried. The flag was upstairs, carefully wrapped, stored away for too long. By 9:00 a.m., Sam was dressed, the medal in his pocket and the folded American flag pressed gently to his chest. He stepped outside, locked the door, and began walking toward the Ravenhill Training Center, a place he'd lived near for 30 years, but never once approached. Today, something told him it was time. The road to Ravenhill Training Center stretched long and silent, flanked by tall maples just beginning to blush with autumn. Sam Granger walked slowly, not from weakness, but from intention. Each step felt deliberate, like he was crossing not just distance, but decades. The folded flag, clutched tightly against his chest, rustled softly with his movements. He could feel the crisp fabric pressing against his heartbeat. In his coat pocket, the bronze star shifted slightly with every stride, like a memory refusing to settle. Sam had passed the base countless times over the years. Its tall chain link, fences, security gates, and hum of distant drills had always remained just out of reach, like a world he no longer belonged to. He remembered when the base first reopened in the '90s after years of closure, new recruits spilling into town officers in press uniforms at the local diner. Sam never crossed the line. He told himself it was because he didn't need to. But the truth was harder. He didn't believe he still had the right. A squirrel darted across the cracked sidewalk, pausing briefly as if studying him, before vanishing into a hedge. Sam's boots, the same pair he'd worn every winter since Betty passed, crunched on fallen leaves that smelled like earth and age. His mind drifted back to a jungle so hot and thick it felt like the world was breathing on you. Laos, 1969. The day the ambush came. It was supposed to be a reconnaissance patrol, no contact expected. They'd move quietly through the trees, but it didn't matter. The enemy had waited. Sam could still hear the first pop of gunfire, the screams, the hiss of bullets splitting jungle leaves. 17 men had lived that day because of a moment he still didn't understand. a reflex, a refusal to die. He'd taken the M60 from a wounded friend and opened fire holding a narrow bend in the trail while the rest of the unit scrambled for cover. His arm had gone numb, his legs had locked, but he didn't move. A week later, he was handed a medal. No parade, no ceremony, just a firm handshake from a captain who never spoke to him again. The base came into view now, its main gate rising ahead like some steel guardian. American flags flapped on their poles sharp against the gray sky. He could see the guardhouses, the concrete barriers, the two young soldiers standing on duty. They hadn't seen him yet. Sam slowed. He looked down at the flag in his hands. Not just cloth, but memory, sacrifice. Names whispered on sleepless nights. He didn't know what he expected to happen when he got there. He only knew this was something he had to do before his time ran out. He crossed the final street, stepped up onto the sidewalk, and took a deep breath. Then with the quiet dignity only age and sacrifice can teach, Samuel Granger stepped toward the gate. "Hold up there, sir." The younger of the two guards stepped forward, hand casually resting on the strap of his rifle. He looked no older than 20, fresh-faced, with the name Cooper stitched neatly above his chest. Behind him, another Private Mendoza leaned slightly out of the booth, eyeing Sam with mild amusement. Sam stopped just short of the checkpoint. He didn't reach for his ID. He didn't have one to offer. Instead, he raised the folded flag slightly and spoke, voice steady but worn. "My name's Samuel Granger. I'm here to donate this flag and this medal to the base. I served in Vietnam." Cooper squinted, lips twitching into a half-smile that wasn't kind. "Sir, this is an active military facility. You need clearance to be here." "I don't want to go in," Sam said softly. "I just wanted to leave these with someone who'd know what they mean." He reached into his coat pocket and gently pulled out the bronze star, holding it up beside the flag. The red, white, and blue ribbon trembled slightly in the wind. His hands did too, but not from age. From something deeper. From the weight of memory. Cooper didn't lean in to inspect the medal. He laughed. "I don't know where you got that, but we're not running a museum, old man." Mendoza chuckled from the booth. "You'd be surprised how many folks show up claiming they won something in Nam." Sam blinked, slowly. He'd expected formality, maybe confusion, but not mockery. "I'm not claiming anything," he murmured. "I just want to make sure these go to someone who understands." "You know what I understand?" Cooper stepped closer, voice firmer now. "I understand that you're standing here holding a flag like it's going to magically open the gates. You're not cleared. You're not on a list. You don't belong here." A few visitors from a base tour group were starting to gather nearby, watching the scene unfold. A man in a polo shirt turned to his wife and whispered something. She nodded, whispering back, "Probably has dementia." Sam's eyes dropped to the ground. The wind tugged at the flag in his arms, and for a moment he hugged it tighter, like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "Control, this is Gate Bravo," Mendoza said into his radio. "We've got a civilian disturbance. Elderly male, possibly unstable. Requesting instruction." Sam's legs wavered beneath him. It wasn't just embarrassment, it was the sharp, clean cut of humiliation, slicing deeper than anything he'd prepared for. He could feel their eyes on him, all of them. The tourists, the guards, even the children with plastic flags in their hands. He thought of Betty, how she used to reassure him when the dreams came back, how she used to hold his hand when he didn't have the words. "I just wanted to leave this in the right hands before I go," he said almost to himself. "What was that?" Cooper asked, clearly not hearing. But Sam didn't repeat it. He didn't shout. He didn't plead. Instead, he nodded once to no one in particular, tucked the medal back into his pocket, turned slowly, and walked away. His steps were small and deliberate, but they felt like a retreat from something much larger than the gate, something deeper than concrete and chain link. Behind him, Cooper muttered, "Geez, the things you see on shift." Mendoza chuckled again. "Let him go. He probably won't remember he was even here." Sam didn't hear them. Or maybe he did. Either way, he kept walking, flag to his chest head, held as high as he could manage as the sound of the gate and the guards and the murmuring crowd faded behind him. The walk back felt longer. Sam Granger moved with the same deliberate steps, but the world around him had changed. Or maybe it was him. The autumn breeze that once felt brisk now cut through his coat. The trees, golden and red an hour ago, seemed muted, like the color had drained from everything. When he reached his porch, he didn't go inside right away. He stood for a moment, gripping the railing, the folded flag still pressed against his chest. A single dry leaf floated down from the maple tree in the yard and landed by his feet. Sam stared at it, how it spun, how it landed, how it didn't resist. Inside the house, silence welcomed him like an old friend. He placed the flag back on the kitchen table next to Betty's photo. For a long while, he didn't sit. He just stood there staring at the table at the two symbols of his life. One was the face that had carried him through everything. The other was the cloth that reminded him why. Betty would have known what to say. She always did. When the nightmares came, when the anniversaries of the firefights rolled around like dark clouds, she never asked for details. She just sat beside him, sometimes with a warm mug, sometimes with silence, always with love. Sam reached out and touched the frame. "I tried, Bets," he whispered. "I really tried." His knees gave in, then not from weakness, but from weight. He sank slowly into the old recliner in the living room, letting his hands fall to the sides. The metal in his coat pocket felt heavier than ever. He closed his eyes. The jungle returned. The heat, the fear, the gunfire, the screams. And then that moment, always that moment, when he stood up with the M60 and walked into a wall of bullets, not to be brave, but because nobody else was left. He could still feel the weight of that weapon, still hear the call-outs behind him, still remember the trembling in his arms as he held the line so the others could crawl to safety. And then silence again. He'd never told anyone. Not even Betty, not in full. She only saw the aftermath. A soft knock echoed from somewhere in the past. He thought it was memory until he heard it again. A firmer knock. At the door. He opened his eyes. Silence again. He figured it was just the wind. He didn't know that several miles away a general was pacing his office with a name burning in his memory. A name spoken in a tone of ridicule that had ignited 50 years of loyalty, debt, and buried guilt. Samuel Granger. And the next time someone knocked on that door, it wouldn't be the wind. It would be the military. Coming home. At Ravenhill Training Center, the hallways of the command wing were alive with the usual rhythm of papers, shuffling boots echoing on tile, and clipped voices delivering reports. Behind a wide oak door marked Commanding Officer General Terrence Nolan stood by his office window, sipping cold coffee and watching a row of cadets perform drills on the distant field. He'd just finished a virtual briefing with Pentagon Logistics. Nothing unusual until he heard the laughter. It carried faintly through the air vent from the common room down the hall. Nolan didn't usually concern himself with what the junior enlisted were joking about during breaks, but this time something in the tone gave him pause, too sharp, too smug. Then he heard the words clearly. "You should have seen the guy," said a young voice, Private Cooper, though Nolan didn't know the name yet. Some old dude showed up waving a flag like it was a golden ticket, said he fought in Nam and wanted to give us a medal. The sound of pool balls breaking punctuated the sentence. He even brought a folded flag, another chimed in, "Mendoza. Looked like a sad little street preacher." I almost felt bad, but it was kind of funny. And then it came. A name. I think it was Granger or something. Samuel Granger. The name hit Nolan like a backhand across the chest. He blinked suddenly, standing too still. The room around him vanished, replaced by the oppressive heat and thick vines of 1969 Laos. There it was, the ambush, the screams, the riverbank soaked in blood and mud, and the young man who saved his life. Granger hadn't just been brave. He'd been extraordinary. Nolan remembered the moment vividly, how Private Granger stepped out from behind cover with an M60, held the trail, and bought them all a chance to live. 14 men had made it home because one kid didn't back down. Nolan hadn't seen him since. The war had a way of scattering people like ashes. He set his coffee down without realizing he'd crushed the paper cup. "Captain," he barked at his aide just outside the door. "Get me the duty roster. I want every name from Gate Bravo now." Minutes later, Cooper and Mendoza stood stiff as boards in front of his desk, eyes darting. "Do you have any idea," Nolan growled, voice low and sharp as a blade, "who you humiliated this morning?" They shook their heads. "Samuel Granger saved 14 American lives in Vietnam, including mine." Silence. "I want his address. And you better pray it's not too late to fix what you've just broken." He turned away and reached for the phone. There were calls to make, a debt to repay, and a man forgotten by time who was about to receive the full weight of the United States Army's apology, led by the man who owed him everything. General Terrence Nolan's voice carried down the hallway before his aide had even opened the office door. "Get me the base operations officer now, and alert motor pool. I want 4 vehicles fueled and ready to move within 20 minutes." Captain Holloway entered with a tablet in hand, brows furrowed. "Sir, what's the—" "I don't have time to explain," Nolan snapped. "Just follow orders." He turned back to the 2 young soldiers standing before his desk, Cooper and Mendoza. The smugness from earlier had evaporated, replaced by pale skin and darting eyes. "Do either of you understand what you've done?" he asked, his tone cold and controlled. "You mocked a man who once held the line under enemy fire so the rest of us could live. You laughed at the man who saved my life." Mendoza's lips parted, but no words came. Nolan leaned forward, placing both hands on the desk. He didn't ask for thanks. He didn't ask for recognition. He came here to leave behind a piece of his soul, and you treated him like garbage. Silence stretched heavy and suffocating. Then Nolan stood upright and pointed to the wall map of Braddock Ridge. "I want a convoy ready to go to this address. 3 Humvees and an SUV. No sirens. No radio chatter. Just presence. I want every neighbor on that street to know something is happening." Captain Holloway raised an eyebrow. "Sir, protocol? Nolan interrupted. "Doesn't account for honor. That man spent 50 years in silence. We're going to break it with respect." Within minutes, the entire command wing was in motion. Outside, the motor pool roared to life, diesel engines grumbling beneath olive drab hoods. 3 Humvees lined up neatly behind a black SUV, adorned with the insignia of the United States Army. Soldiers climbed into passenger seats with puzzled expressions. No one knew why the general himself was leading this convoy. They only knew it wasn't a drill. Inside Nolan's office, Cooper and Mendoza stood at parade rest, still stunned. "You're both coming with me," Nolan said, pulling on his dress jacket. "You will stand there and see firsthand the man you judged. And when he opens that door, you will remember the look on his face for the rest of your lives." Cooper swallowed. "Yes, sir." Nolan adjusted his collar in the mirror, took one last look at the framed photo on his desk, a tattered image of a much younger him kneeling in jungle mud beside an injured Granger, and headed for the door. As the convoy rolled out through the front gates of Ravenhill, traffic stopped on the highway. Horns went quiet. Curious eyes followed the small military procession weaving its way into the suburbs. On Maple Hollow Lane, residents stepped onto their porches, shielding their eyes against the glare. At the far end of the street, in a small white house with blue shutters, Samuel Granger sat in his recliner, eyes closed, unaware that history was about to knock on his door, wearing full uniform. The knock was solid 3 sharp raps that echoed through the walls like a distant memory returned. Sam Granger stirred in his recliner. For a moment he thought he'd imagined it, but there it was again, firm, respectful, unmistakably military. He pushed himself up slowly, joints aching, and shuffled toward the door. When he opened it, the world outside stopped. Standing on his front porch was a man in full dress uniform, polished boots planted firmly on the concrete cap tucked beneath one arm. His chest gleamed with ribbons and medals, his posture straight, still as stone. But it was the eyes that held Sam still. 50 years may have passed, but no war ever erases a man's eyes. Behind the general, 3 Humvees and a black SUV lined the curb, their engines idling softly. Neighbors had gathered on front lawns, watching with confusion, some filming on their phones. The soldiers who once stood tall now looked uncertain, subdued. The general raised his right hand slowly, and with the reverence only earned through combat, he saluted. Sam blinked, his lips parted. His fingers trembled where they gripped the doorframe. "It's you," he said softly, breath catching in his chest. "You lived." The general lowered his salute and took one step forward. "Because of you, Sam," he replied. "I've worn this uniform for 50 years trying to be worthy of that moment." Sam's knees threatened to give, but he held firm. He stared into the face of the young captain he had once pulled from jungle mud, bleeding and near death during a firefight no one expected to survive. Captain Nolan had become General Nolan. Sam looked past him, briefly saw 2 soldiers standing rigid behind the general. The young one on the left, Cooper, was visibly pale. Mendoza beside him avoided eye contact altogether. Nolan noticed. They're here to learn something today, he said gently. Something I should have taught them sooner. Sam's eyes didn't leave Nolan's. You remember all of it, he asked. Every second, Nolan replied. I remember you standing in that clearing, not even flinching. I remember thinking I'd never see my wife again, and then there you were. Sam took a deep breath, voice raspy. You were the one I dragged out. You saved me, Sam. You saved 14 of us, and I've owed you ever since. The two men stood in silence, the past flooding the space between them. Finally, Nolan reached out, offering not a handshake, but his hand in respect. Sam hesitated only a second before taking it. It was firm, warm, real. Forgive what happened at the gate, Nolan said. They didn't know who you are, but I do. Sam looked past him again at the convoy, the uniforms, the eyes watching from porches and driveways. This is a lot, he said, voice cracking. You deserve more, Nolan said. But this is a start. Sam stepped back from the doorway, nodding. Come on in. It's not much, but it's home. As Nolan stepped inside, Cooper and Mendoza remained outside waiting. They hadn't been invited in. Not yet. That would come later after the apology, after the lesson, after 2 generations of military men stood face to face in the living room of a forgotten hero. And for the first time in decades, Sam Granger no longer felt like a man out of place. He felt seen. The living room was quiet, modest, and warm, filled with the scent of old wood and faded memories. Sam Granger placed the folded flag on the coffee table with care, then eased himself into the recliner across from General Nolan. For a moment, neither man spoke. Outside, the neighbors still lingered on their porches. The 3 Humvees and SUV remained at idle, a silent formation of respect. Nolan turned toward the door. Cooper, Mendoza. The 2 young soldiers stepped inside, hats off backs, stiff eyes lowered. Sam studied them, his weathered gaze calm but unyielding. He saw the discomfort written all over them, the kind that doesn't come from being yelled at, but from being truly ashamed. Cooper spoke first. Sir, Sergeant Granger, I want to apologize. I didn't know who you were. That doesn't excuse it, but I was wrong, deeply wrong. Mendoza stepped forward. His voice cracked. We treated you like you were nothing. We didn't even listen. And we were supposed to protect the honor of men like you. We failed that. Sam looked at the 2 boys because that's what they were to him now. He saw flashes of the young men he'd once served with. Boys who thought they knew what war was until it arrived in gunfire and firestorms. You did what you thought was right in the moment, Sam said softly. That matters more than you realize. But listen close, every man carries scars. Some you see, some you don't. Always remember that. He paused. You looked at me and saw someone worn out, disposable. But I've worn this coat longer than you've worn boots. Neither soldier flinched. They stood straighter, more grounded in humility than in pride. General Nolan rose from the couch. I brought these men here not just to apologize, Sam, but to witness, to understand the weight of service and of silence. He turned to the soldiers. This man saved lives. He carried that burden alone for decades. What you saw today wasn't weakness. It was courage. Sam reached over and gently picked up the medal from the side table. He handed it to Nolan along with the folded flag. I came to the gate to give these away. I thought maybe someone younger would carry them forward. Nolan accepted them with reverence, then placed them right back in Sam's lap. Allow me to suggest something else. Outside, soldiers exited the Humvees and formed a ceremonial line across Sam's small front yard. Word had spread. Neighbors gathered closer, silent now. You will be our guest of honor, Nolan said. Next week, Veterans Day, full ceremony, and these 2, he glanced at Cooper and Mendoza, will lead the honor guard. Sam stared at the flag. For once, his hands didn't tremble. All right, General, he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Let's give the boys a history lesson they'll never forget. The morning of Veterans Day arrived crisp and cold. A thin layer of frost clung to the grass outside Ravenhill Training Center, sparkling beneath the rising sun. Folding chairs lined the courtyard filled with soldiers, officers, veterans, and civilians from across the region. American flags waved from every post, and a brass quintet played softly in the background, their notes carried on the wind like a prayer. In the front row sat Private Cooper and Private Mendoza, their uniforms immaculate, their backs straight, their eyes filled with anticipation and a little awe. Then the murmurs began. At the far end of the courtyard, Samuel Granger appeared. He walked slowly but without assistance, his shoulders back and his chin lifted. He wore a dark suit, the same one he wore when he married Betty. In his hands, he carried the folded flag and the bronze star cradled like sacred relics. As he approached the podium, the entire crowd rose in silence. General Nolan stepped forward, offering Sam a steady hand up the stage steps. The two men exchanged a quiet look, respect flowing between them like an unspoken current. Sam turned to the microphone. "I came here today not as someone looking for recognition," he said, his voice gravelly but strong. "I came to honor the men who didn't come home, the ones whose names I still whisper when no one's listening." He held up the flag. "This flag sat in my closet for 50 years. Every time I looked at it, I saw faces, brothers, friends, sacrifices, and I wondered if the world had moved on too far to remember." A hush swept over the courtyard. "But last week I found out that memory isn't just something we carry. It's something we pass on. Not through medals, not through parades, but through understanding, through humility, through moments like this." He stepped forward and handed the flag to General Nolan, who accepted it with full ceremonial honors. Cooper and Mendoza stepped onto the stage, joining the honor guard. Their faces were changed not just with respect, but with the deep, quiet knowledge of what service truly means. As Sam stepped back, the crowd erupted in a standing ovation. And for the first time in decades, he didn't feel like a forgotten soldier. He felt whole. Outside the base, the first snow of winter began to fall soft, slow, quiet like a blessing. In the weeks that followed the Veterans Day ceremony, the ripple of that moment never stopped. Private Cooper and Private Mendoza, once just two young soldiers going through the motions, became something more. They requested transfers into Ravenhill's Honor Guard Division, not for prestige, but because they wanted to serve with purpose. Every week they stood at memorials, flag ceremonies, and funerals, and each time they carried with them the story of Samuel Granger. Not as a speech, but as a memory etched into them, a lesson earned, not taught. Across town in a quiet office inside the local VFW, Sam found a new rhythm. He didn't need to speak much. Most of the young vets who came through the door didn't want speeches anyway. What they needed was someone who understood the silence between words, someone who knew what it felt like to come home and feel like the world had forgotten you. Sam listened. Sometimes he offered advice. Sometimes he just sat beside them and let the silence say what words couldn't. And slowly the weight he had carried alone for so long began to spread into the hands of others, lighter shared healing. Every Sunday afternoon, Cooper and Mendoza dropped by. They called him Sergeant now, not out of duty, but respect. They brought coffee, sometimes pie, sometimes questions. Sam welcomed them with a smile that was no longer burdened by bitterness. At night, when the visitors had gone and the quiet settled back in, Sam would return to his recliner by the window. The folded flag now rested in a case on the wall, beside a small plaque Nolan had made for courage unspoken, for lives saved in silence. And beside him always was the photo of Betty. One evening, as the wind rustled the bare trees outside, Sam rocked gently in his chair, a blanket over his legs, a half-finished crossword on the table. He looked at Betty's picture and gave a quiet chuckle. "Took me long enough, didn't it?" Then he leaned back, eyes, soft heart steady. And for the first time in decades, Samuel Granger smiled, not for the world, but for himself. He had finally come home. In a world that moves faster with each passing year, it's easy to forget the quiet heroes, the ones who never asked for attention, who returned from war and built lives in silence. Men like Samuel Granger remind us that dignity doesn't shout, it endures. That honor isn't always awarded, it's carried. This story isn't just about military service. It's about how we treat each other. It's about how easy it is to dismiss someone based on appearance or age, and how devastating that mistake can be. It's a reminder that everyone you meet, especially our elders, may be carrying memories, grief, and sacrifices you'll never see. In today's divided world, maybe what we need most is not more noise, but more listening. So let me ask you, Have you ever misjudged someone only to later learn who they really were? Do you believe we do enough to honor our veterans, not with medals, but with understanding? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your own stories about your parents, your neighbors, or that quiet man down the street who may be more than he seems. And if this story moved you, if Sam reminded you of someone you love, please give this video a like. It helps more people hear stories like his. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. We've got more powerful stories coming, real human stories that remind us who we are and who we still can be. To all our veterans, our elders, and those quietly carrying the weight of yesterday, thank you. You are not forgotten, and you never will be. Until next time, take care of each other and listen closely. Sometimes the quietest voices have the most to teach us.